Boruto. I'm willing to die at any moment for Konoha, as is Naruto. We're always prepared to do so. What about you? Could you die for the village? Why are you here? If you come to die at home, I'll help you. Right here, right now. Dying in Konoha doesn't sound bad, but not today. Hey, how's it going? In today's video, we'll be talking about Boruto. More specifically, we'll be addressing the topic that keeps reoccurring in the Boruto series, and that's Boruto's death. Will he die at some point in Two Blue Vortex? And is his death inevitable? I'm starting to feel as though Boruto's death is a thing that will always bring forth the darkest timeline. And I don't just mean that from a very literal perspective. I actually believe that Earth's destiny and Boruto's destiny are actually intertwined. This video will contain major spoilers for the manga. You have been warned. With that being said, let's get started. Every shinobi risks their lives to protect their families, their friends, their homes, and their villages from outside threats. And Boruto is no different in this case. He is a soldier putting his life on the front lines to protect the things he cares about the most. Then we learned about potential futures through prescience in Two Blue Vortex chapter 13. It gave us a lot more insight in how Boruto's life could have been cut short throughout multiple alternative scenarios, which doesn't seem like a big deal at first. But something you'll soon come to notice is that each time Boruto has died in these pocket futures, the end of the world came shortly after. Chapter 13 of Two Blue Vortex provides us a dark mirror into what could have happened in Chapter 53 of Boruto Part 1. So Koji explained a possible scenario in which Ishiki actually managed to win. Instead of sparing Naruto's life in a desperate pursuit for Kawaki, Ishiki decided to kill Naruto after his Baryon mode ran out. This action without a doubt affected Kawaki's behavior, as he was planning on tricking Ishiki with his shadow clone, and Kawaki at that point got implanted with a new karma seal. In this possible future, Ishiki resurrects in Kawaki and sacrifices Boruto to the Ten Tails, meaning everyone dies due to a divine tree being planted on Earth and the devour process sucking up all the chakra from everyone. Boruto chapter 47 of part 1 showed the first debut of Ishiki Otsutsuki, which occurred right after Kashin Koji incinerated Jigen's body, thus forcing Ishiki to revive. Ishiki, instead of killing Koji right away, decided to speak with him, but the manner in which he spoke to Koji made him sound a lot like a prophet reading someone else's destiny. Just like Momoshiki and Toneri in the anime, Ishiki speaks about someone else's predestined fate. Ishiki says to Koji that all genes have a predestined fate. But what's interesting is that after this, he speaks about a man that Koji's genetics are based off of, someone he has never directly met. He talks about Jiraiya and how he bore a mighty fate, a star of change. And you can read between the lines with Ishiki's dialogue here, but from my interpretation, when Ishiki was residing in Jigen's body, it's implied he didn't understand why Amato would have created Koji from a dead shinobi in the first place. But once Jigen is dead and Ishiki revives himself inside of the body, he has full access to his Otsutsuki powers and abilities. Everything became quite clear to him in that moment. Because Jiraiya's destiny was connected to a great change, Ishiki figured out that this was something that Amato had hoped Koji would carry on in the hopes of achieving his own respective goals. Ishiki references Kashin Koji as a clone of Jiraiya of the Great Three. Again, the way Ishiki speaks, it's as if he could see Jiraiya's entire life, his destiny to change things in the world, but also how his life came to an end. Ishiki determined because Kashin Koji was a clone of this man, he too would have the same predestined fate. And the parallels between Koji and Jiraiya are more in sync with each other than one might initially think at face value. They both worked closely with a comrade prior to their fights with the leader of an evil organization. They also both lost to that same leader because their enemy had more power than each individual realized. And they laid down in the same position once they were defeated by that same leader. Jiraiya also knew that he was going to die in Naruto chapter 382, but he had no regrets. He decided to put his trust in Naruto, his student, at the end of the day, and leave the rest of the problems to him in order to defeat pain. And we learned more about Koji's perspective after he lost to Ishiki in 2 Blue Vortex chapter 13. Kashin Koji also had no regrets, accepted his death, and was ready to leave the rest to the 7th Hokage. So when Ishiki talks about Boruto's predestined fate due to his Otsutsuki genes in chapter 51 of part 1, there's a lot of credibility to what he's saying. He's not just saying this from a place of arrogance and cockiness. He saw that this was Boruto's destiny and this was something that was absolute. Koji in 2 Blue Vortex chapter 13 then proceeds to talk to Boruto about a darker version of an event that could have taken place in chapter 78 of part 1. So on this alternative take of chapter 78, Sarada ends up showing up to confront Kawaki and stop him from attacking Boruto, just like in the original turn of events. Kawaki gives her a warning: if she does not want to get killed, do not interfere. Sarada ultimately does end up interfering in the actual chapter, not believing that Kawaki would actually go through with killing his comrades. But in Koji's explanation, that is exactly what happened. He ends up killing Boruto and Sarada. So Koji doesn't go into a lot of detail on how Boruto and Sarada died, but one could read between the lines in this particular scenario as well. After Sarada got killed, Boruto was likely broken and shocked that Kawaki would even do this. At this point, Kawaki entered his Karma version 2 state to finish Boruto off for good. At this point, Code would have no choice but to use Kawaki as his only sacrifice to the Ten Tails. And since this is a code that has its limiters removed in this part of the timeline, Kawaki absolutely stands no chance, and he ends up getting fed to the Ten Tails himself, thus bringing in the darkest timeline once again. In my opinion, what averted this timeline and prevented Boruto and Sarada's deaths was none other than Momoshiki himself. Back in chapter 72 of part 1, Momoshiki had taunted Boruto, saying that the time Boruto would lose everything was drawing closer and closer. Boruto was frustrated by Momoshiki, and I believe Boruto's foreknowledge of him losing everything made him more cautious in chapter 78. This is why Boruto shielded Sarada and got his scar, rather than him trusting her to defend herself, which would have resulted in both of them getting killed. Momoshiki couldn't afford that to happen, since obviously he would lose his only vessel, which means he dies as well, and omnipotence wouldn't occur in this timeline either. But Koji doesn't just stop there. No, he actually goes over more scenarios in which Boruto could get killed. He talks about Jura to Boruto 2 years prior to Jura even being created, and outright says to Boruto that he is going to kill him. This is not something Koji said lightly. This must have been something that occurred in countless timelines that Koji saw through prescience. And this makes sense, because what the chapter is basically implying is that Boruto's death, whether directly or indirectly, ultimately ends up with the Ten Tails achieving its goal and harvesting the chakra fruit, thus bringing in the darkest timeline. And what Koji said in that same chapter held a lot of merit, because once Jura learned that Boruto knew about the Thorn Soul bulbs, it was no longer about eating an Otsutsuki. This was about killing an active threat. But Jura's plan was delayed thanks in part to Koji's prescience, creating a scenario for Boruto to survive this encounter. Boruto knowing the Flying Raijin and Rasengan Uzuhiko are anomalies in itself. These were techniques that Boruto learned much later in his life in alternate futures. Boruto knowing these techniques right now should be impossible, but because he did know these techniques, he was able to destroy enough of Hidari's body in 2 Blue Vortex chapter 12, which in turn led to Kawaki finishing Hidari off, thus releasing the Thorn Soul bulb in the process. This forced Jura's hand and made him retreat. Yes, Boruto is a threat, but the bigger threat is the one who gave Boruto the information in the first place. It also seems very natural for Jura to want to lead as well. It's like he has that leader quality within him. And Hidari followed Jura without question, so it would not make sense to lose a useful ally if his Thorn Soul bulb rotted. Jura then says something very interesting. He proceeds to say that the heavens must be decreeing that Boruto remain alive, and that Boruto is truly a lucky man. that Boruto being spared was some sort of divine intervention. And I believe Jura has a great point here. And as a matter of fact, Jura is right, because Boruto actually has managed to escape death on numerous occasions due to the influence of the Otsutsuki or their powers. Momoshiki's words about those defeating the gods cannot remain ordinary individuals may have bigger implications than just placing a karma on Boruto. So let's go over the basis for how Boruto was able to survive his encounters with death. Momoshiki revived him when he got killed by Kawaki back in chapter 66, using his karma, which was intended for his resurrection, to replace Boruto's damaged or missing organs. Momoshiki also indirectly saved Boruto's life in chapter 78, so that omnipotence could be casted in chapter 79 of part 1. He needed Boruto alive so that this timeline could be brought into fruition and be a timeline that works in his favor, because he intended to take over Boruto's body forever. Omnipotence was a shinjutsu which originated from Shibai Otsutsuki, and this shinjutsu indirectly saved Boruto's life. Boruto is also alive currently in the timeline because of his status as a singularity of fate, because he knows about Jura and the other Shinju's plans prior to it actually happening. He's adjusting his behavior to prevent his death. Yet another one of Shibai's abilities is now keeping Boruto alive. The only difference this time is that it's directly keeping Boruto alive. So do I think that there's a connection between Boruto and Shibai Otsutsuki? Yes, absolutely. Do I think this is reincarnation? No. I actually do not think this is the case, and here is why. Because Shibai willingly casted away his body and transited to another dimension. So if he's in another plane of existence, how would he have time to reincarnate into this random earthling? That doesn't really make sense to me. I feel like there's more to it than that. And I think the answer is going to be a lot more interesting once we find out in the actual story. Something I've always wondered as well is, why did Kashin Koji decide to turn Boruto into a singularity over Kawaki? And yes, one could sum up that Boruto being a rogue ninja means that he's less likely to create other singularities, but chapter 17 of Two Blue Vortex hints to something else otherwise. When Boruto got frustrated that Kashin Koji wouldn't give him direct answers to like the chances of his friends surviving against the Shinju, Boruto wanted to get involved directly, and then Kashin Koji told him no. He says that just like Himawari, if Boruto gets involved with the Shinju right now in the story, Jura would sense Boruto's presence, teleport directly to that location, and Boruto would die this time, no question about it. Koji then says that Boruto is the one thing we cannot lose. The we is pretty much me assuming that he's talking about humanity and humanity's future. It's clear Koji has a plan for dealing with Jura, and I'll get more into how Boruto plays a role into that later in this video. Jura is powerful, no one could deny that, and Koji has been working around the clock to view numerous amounts of futures to see how Jura and the other Shinju could possibly be defeated. He also told Shikamaru back in chapter 16 that under no circumstances is the leaf to engage Jura, because if Jura is provoked, then the chances of humanity escaping the darkest timeline would be absolutely none. Koji understands that Jura actually has admiration for the Hidden Leaf Village's culture, and I believe Koji wants to engineer a version of Jura that decides to spare humanity. With Jura and the other Shinju still being young and impressionable, I believe Koji wants to tame Jura while he's a naive cubling. While Jura is distracted with his goals of obtaining knowledge and learning more about himself, Koji will keep using Shikamaru as a mouthpiece to send specific shinobi to fight specific Shinju and exploit specific weaknesses of the original characters the Shinju are based on. A divide and conquer approach. I believe once the Shinju forces are dwindled down, Koji will spring Boruto in to deal with Jura. Boruto is stronger in the story, no one is denying that either, but we know at his current power level, he is no match for Jura at all. So Boruto is going to need to tap into more of his Otsutsuki power, and I think this will come into the form of karma, but more specifically his jougan. Now, the question is How is he going to get access to these things again? And we know that in Boruto chapter 78, Boruto protected Sarada from getting killed by Kawaki and thus received his scar, blinding him in his right eye. Boruto completely lost the ability to use this eye in a regular state. However, when Momoshiki took over in the same chapter, the Karma Seal seemed to strengthen Boruto's damaged eye muscles enough to actually return functionality and use of it. So the karma quite literally is a key to Boruto's house containing his hidden power. A similar analogy that Amato made towards Kawaki's weaponized karma for Ishiki's power. But here's the problem. Boruto's karma is unstable right now. Boruto said in 2 Blue Vortex chapter 15 that he didn't use his karma seal after leaving the village. He decided to use karma, however, when he and Sasuke fought Code during the events of 2 Blue Vortex chapter 5's flashback. So while Boruto was recalling the fight that he and his master had with Code, Boruto tells Kawaki that when he activated the karma, he felt a sensation. Boruto literally described it as like he was dying while still being fully alive and conscious. He said it was the same sensation he felt when Momoshiki was taking over. And I guess the feeling was so intense and terrible that once the fight was reaching its conclusion, Boruto reverted back to fighting Code in his base form. So why is this even a problem for Boruto? Because at the end of part 1, Boruto had perfect mastery of his karma. He was able to use it while defending himself against Kawaki in chapter 78. Then fast forward 3 years later, and he fights Kawaki again in 2 Blue Vortex chapter 9, and he has to flee the scene because of the karma resonance, because he's scared that he's going to lose control to Momoshiki. I believe there was a lot more repercussions for chapter 67 when Momoshiki revived Boruto. This has everything to do with it. We have to go over how Kawaki managed to kill Boruto in the first place to understand. Kawaki impaled Boruto with his ninja tech, completely penetrating his chest area. Then he proceeded to expand the ninja tech, which obliterated Boruto's organs, which forced Momoshiki's hand. He had no choice but to use the remaining percentage of the karma that would have been used to resurrect himself to replicate and replace the DNA with Boruto's missing organs. And this was a very unnatural and unorthodox thing to do with the karma seal. This may have been fine for Boruto when he was younger, but as he got older, I'm sure his organs changed and grew, and he went through puberty, so his body's naturally changing. And I think this is what caused the instability. As we saw in the very first scene of the franchise, Boruto not only is using his karma again willingly, but thanks to the karma strengthening his damaged eye, he is also able to access the jougan. So now the question is, how in the world does Boruto find a way to use his karma? So ask yourself this. Who is the only other person that Kashin Koji seems very adamant on keeping alive? Someone he wants to keep alive almost as much as Boruto. The answer is Himawari Uzumaki. Now you're probably asking yourself, how does keeping Himawari alive help in supporting Koji in his war against Jura? The answer is quite simple. It has everything to do with Himawari's performance in chapters 11 and 13 of 2 Blue Vortex. Himawari has a special healing ability that she can utilize with Kurama's chakra. This is not medical ninjutsu. I personally think this is an artificial version of the creation of all things technique, which she is able to tap into due to her lineage and Six Paths chakra that she acquired from her parents. Himawari's ability may be the key to repairing Boruto's original organs or stabilizing Boruto's new karma created organs, and with that being fixed, this will stabilize Boruto's karma activation. I don't think it was a coincidence that Inojin and Boruto had very similar looking injuries, and Himawari just happened to heal Inojin enough for him to survive. I think this is foreshadowing for what's to come between the two siblings. And if Himawari heals Boruto in this manner, this will make the parallel with her father even more apparent. Naruto used the creation of all things technique to generate a new eye for Kakashi after he lost Obito's Sharingan to Madara during the 4th Great Shinobi War. Himawari could use her variation of the creation of all things technique to restore Boruto's damaged organs enough where he can use the Karma Seal again and thus access his eye once more. After reading Boruto chapter 18, I think Koji allowed Boruto to tell Kawaki how to get stronger occurred for two reasons, and it's actually brilliant when you really think about it. For one, Kawaki needs to get stronger to defend himself, and Sukuna Hikona is the perfect counter against the claw marks. The second reason is we know Kawaki is not going to keep his end of the bargain in terms of resurrecting Akabe. I believe this will enrage Amato to a point where he'll be willing to work with Kashin Koji in order to take Kawaki down. Amato also gave Boruto pills in the past to slow down his karmic resurrection. Obviously, Boruto is facing a completely different dilemma in Two Blue Vortex, and that's of course stabilizing the karma. But 3 years have gone by, and it's possible that Amato could have another trick up his sleeve or new inventions that could assist Boruto in preventing Momoshiki from taking over, especially if he wants Boruto to succeed in stabilizing Kawaki so that he could achieve his own goals. Even how Boruto activated his Karma Seal against Kawaki in the very first scene of the series is very different to how he awakened it in different parts of Boruto Part 1. It was an extremely slow activation rather than something that was instantaneous. I also believe there's evidence for Boruto's death being connected to the darkest timeline can be found in episode 1 and chapter 1 of Boruto Part 1. So Kawaki currently in Two Blue Vortex wants Boruto and all other Otsutsuki related threats to be killed, believing this will bring forth a world where people like Naruto could thrive in. Kawaki has actively wanted to kill Boruto for the better half of 3 years, but in episode 1, which at the beginning, that's the furthest we've seen of the timeline, he completely shifts this perspective, wanting to seal Boruto in the same manner that he did to Hinata and Naruto. But why would that be the case? Boruto asks Kawaki a very peculiar question in the anime. He says, "Was this the only possible outcome?" Kawaki then says, "Yes, that's right. The age of Shinobi is over." So why would Boruto ever be asking Kawaki this question if Kashin Koji is in his corner? So we know something's going to happen between Boruto and Koji at some point in Two Blue Vortex. In the manga version of events, Boruto says, "I guess this was the only possible outcome." And the way he's speaking about what happened to the Leaf Village was like, it was in hindsight, like, oh, duh, this needed to happen so we could prevent the darkest timeline. I believe Kawaki did destroy the Leaf Village, but it wasn't to kill everybody, it was to end the Shinobi system. Somehow ending the Shinobi system is going to lead to a better future. Kawaki has a utilitarian mindset. He is willing to sacrifice something or anyone to bring in peace for the majority. He will do that regardless of the morality behind it. It's been shown throughout this entire series through his many different actions. This also explains Kawaki's change in apparel from the clothes we saw in Two Blue Vortex to the clothing he wears in the first scene of the franchise. In chapter 18 of Two Blue Vortex, Kawaki tells Amato if he wants him to survive, to make him an even bigger and badder monster than the monsters that are actually plaguing the world. Kawaki's clothes and choice of weapon reflects the monsters who used to control and abuse him as a child. His father's white clothing, a scarf reminiscent of Code's clothing, and Code choking him out. And then there's Jigen's rod, which he used to get beat with during his time in Kara. Kawaki feels that he has to be the monster and do the hard thing to stop all threats that are coming to Earth. He is the destruction Toneri was talking about in the anime, because in order to create a peaceful timeline from his perspective, he has to destroy what is the status quo. Speaking of Toneri, in Boruto episode 8, he appeared to Boruto within a dream, and in a similar fashion to Ishiki and Momoshiki, he provides a prophecy for Boruto. Toneri describes Boruto's eye as a star of hope, similar to how Jiraiya and by extension Kashin Koji were described as a star of change. So this eye will work against a destruction that will eventually come to pass. So who has the most potential to desire to destroy the Leaf Village? The Shinju Well, that's hard to say. They're still young and impressionable, and because of the fact that they're cublings, they have the potential to change their minds about things. Jura also values the culture of the Leaf Village. I feel like if it's Jura that destroys the village, it'll be very, very predictable. Amato? As far as we know about Amato, he just wants to revive his daughter. Allegedly, that's his only plan, but we don't know fully what he desires, but I doubt it's destruction. So let's say Code. Yeah, Code is a very strong candidate for being one of these people to want to destroy the Leaf Village. However, in the story right now, he's weaker than Boruto, and he has never outright won a battle in a major fight against anybody. So he's always been taking L's. So I doubt it's Code. And then there's Kawaki. So he has actively declared and embraced that the age of Shinobi has ended. So if somebody is actively saying that and there's evidence that's supporting his words, why wouldn't it be Kawaki? Toneri then points to Boruto and says that the power of hope resides inside of him, implying that this is a hidden power Boruto has yet to master. Boruto immediately puts 2 and 2 together and realizes that the eye that Toneri is talking about is not the Byakugan. It's something far more powerful and far more significant. Toneri says something very interesting with a half a smile. He says with that eye, that Boruto will shoulder the fate of the entire world. So ask yourself this. What has Boruto been actively trying to do the entire time in Two Blue Vortex? Well, yes, stop the Shinju, but more importantly than that, prevent the world's destruction, to stop the worst possible future or darkest timeline. The eye is simply another tool that will help him to prevent the darkest timeline. Toneri then says that Boruto's eye will probably guide him to a light that dispels the darkness. Kawaki blinded Boruto in his eye in chapter 78 of part 1. But once Boruto uses his karma and jougan together, then what Toneri says quite literally becomes true. The light reflected from the jougan would literally repel Boruto's blindness. Toneri uses the word probably because it's likely that the timeline at this point where he's speaking to Boruto is ever changing. So, and there's evidence to support that as well because, again, in chapter 13 of Two Blue Vortex, Koji described the alternate scenario for how things could have played out between Boruto and Kawaki. So Boruto didn't get blinded in every single outcome in chapter 78. Unfortunately, in some outcomes he died, but there could have been even more outcomes that Koji just didn't speak about. After the dream, Boruto wakes up and it's the next morning. He checks himself out in the mirror and it flashes to none other than the jougan. So is Boruto going to die? Yes, this is his predestined fate. He is always meant to die, and Koji's prescience is what's keeping that from happening. And this is one of the reoccurring themes in both Naruto and Boruto, overcoming predestined fate. So let's take it back to the Kashin Koji example. If prescience never activated within Kashin Koji, then he was willingly going to accept his death and die in the same manner that Jiraiya did. But prescience gave Koji the motivation to keep going, and he defied what his genetics set out to do. So who's to say that's not the same case for Boruto and other characters in this franchise? Boruto is definitely prepared to die at any moment. If it means his village, his family, and friends are spared, he's willing to lose it all if he gets those things. I also believe Boruto knows it himself that it's his predestined fate to die, but he's not leaving this earth until he achieves his goals. For instance, Boruto wants to restore the Uzumaki household. He wants to see his parents free and his sister having a family again. And Kawaki also being redeemed is something worth dying for in Boruto's eyes. So this makes Boruto's last stand against Kawaki even more telling. This is not a normal fight. This is a fight between two singularities for the control of the future, the fate of the entire world. Kawaki found a future where humanity thrives once the shinobi system falls. Boruto doesn't oppose Kawaki because he's wrong, Boruto disagrees with Kawaki at his fundamental core, because at the end of the day, Boruto has the soul of a shinobi. He's not going to just fall to the wayside. He's going to die by the sword if he has to. We're going to see Boruto throughout Two Blue Vortex relying on prescience to get his way. But the truth of life is that there are no real shortcuts. Sometimes you can't predict the future. And with Boruto being a singularity of fate as well as Kawaki, you better believe his destiny is going to change.